Hello and welcome to the Geneva Peace Week 2020 event, Drug Policy Reform, Opportunity or Threat to International Security. I'm the moderator, Tuesday Reitano, Deputy Director of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. I'd like to thank the Global Commission on Drug Policy and the Geneva Center on Security Policy for organizing this event in Geneva Peace Week. I am going to be extremely pleased and most honored to introduce you to the immensely distinguished panel that will be speaking here today. We have brought together a group of highly experienced leading thinkers and practitioners from both the peace and security space and the drug policy community to explore the intersection of these two themes. We will first open with a set of introductory remarks from Ambassador Christian Dussey, Director of the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Prior to taking up his current post at the GCSP, Ambassador Dussey was the Swiss ambassador and head of the Crisis Management Center of the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. We'll then move to our panel, who will feature Madame Ruth Dreifuss, former president of Switzerland and a member of the Global Commission on Drug Policy. In her distinguished career in public service, Madame Dreifuss has led public health initiatives and innovations in the fields of drug addiction and HIV/AIDS prevention. We have Monsieur Javier Solana, former Secretary General of NATO and the European Union High Representative for the Common Foreign and Security Policy, and the Secretary General of the Council of the European Union. On the peace and security side, I'm also pleased to introduce Ms. Renata Dwan, Director of the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, UNIDIR, who has worked for many years in the UN system, including in numerous peace operations and on complex emergencies, including in Afghanistan, the Republic of Congo, Haiti, Mali, and Syria. And finally, but by no means least, Monsieur Jean-Marie Guéhenno, former United Nations Under-Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, a role in which he served from 2000 to 2008, which made him not only the longest serving head of peacekeeping operations, but he also oversaw the largest expansion in the history of peacekeeping in the United Nations. And so with no further ado, I'm very pleased to pass the floor to Ambassador Dussey of the Geneva Center of Security Policy for his introductory remarks.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to our viewers. Thank you very much for joining us today, wherever you are. The Geneva Center for Security Policy, the GCSP, is proud to support this discussion with the participation of very distinguished panelists. A discussion that will explore whether drug policy reform represents a threat or an opportunity to international security. Drug policy is indeed an integral part of international security. Today, according to UNODC, the production and use of drugs have increased across the globe. The global drug market is hence expanding and becoming more complex. And this is for a number of reasons. From the use of new technologies and new substances to new forms of trafficking that have been induced and accelerated by the COVID-19 health crisis. Organized crime is also constantly adapting and transforming. Broadly speaking, states have chosen two core approaches in drug policy: a punitive approach or a more lenient approach. These choices affect drug policies and law enforcement strategies, with both facing a challenging and ever-changing environment. The panel will analyze and outline the various virtues and weaknesses of these different approaches in terms of their impact on international security and peace. To deter and manage in an effective manner the growing power and reach of transnational organized crime, as well as the increasingly sophisticated illegal drug markets, we will need three key ingredients: extensive collaboration, creativity and imagination, as well as trust. This is at the core of what we do here at GCSP. We are a center for executive education, a platform for diplomatic dialogue, and an incubator for innovative projects, international peace and security. In all what we do, we stress that collaboration, creativity, and trust are indispensable. They might be hard to achieve, but are worth fighting for. These three ingredients will help us, individuals and institutions, better anticipate, adapt, and learn faster than the global networks we are facing, whether these are international organized crime, terrorist groups, or a deadly virus, such as COVID-19. Our motto at GCC is, don't fight the problem, shape the solution. I hope that together we can shape solution and make the world a safer place. I wish the distinguished panelists a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to you, Ambassador Dussey. I very much appreciate the gracious opening remarks and the scene setting. We will be discussing the intersection of drug policy and security policy. So before we begin, it behooves considering why these two themes belong together. Drugs and conflict are becoming almost inextricably interlinked, both on the part of the state and non-state actors, with many conflict actors being fueled by narcotics, while the conflict itself is funded by taxes on the illicit drug economy. So while drugs are rarely the reason a conflict begins, we have too many contemporary examples of where the drug economy has prolonged and exacerbated levels of violence and prevented successful peace building. I am now very pleased again to welcome our panel, Madame Ruth Dreifuss, Monsieur Javier Solana, Monsieur Jean-Marie Guéhenno, and Ms. Renata Dwan. Madame Dreifuss, if I could turn the first question to you. In the most recent report of the Global Commission on Drug Policy, it explored the link between drug control and the fight against transnational organized crime. What were the recommendations of this report, and who did you call upon to take those recommendations forward?
Thank you so much, and I am so grateful to be sitting together virtually with my fellow panelists, and thank you to the Center and to the week, Geneva Peace Week, to host this panel. So to answer your question, why are we worried about the way the repression plays a very utmost role in drug policy, neglecting other aspects and neglecting the consequences of repression? The 50 years old international control system on drugs has as a utopic, I would say an utopic aim to realize a society without drug. And this is something that has inspired a repressive way to deal with drug and to consider that the drugs are the real issue and the drugs have to be fought against, which means practically that there is also a fight against the people who use drugs. The Global Commission has analyzed what are the results of this kind of policy, this kind of harsh containment of production and consumption of drugs. And these consequences, recognized by the UN as unintended consequences of the international control regime, it is an increase of the incarceration level in all countries. It is an increase of a situation where the population that are most affected by the presence of drug in society are neglected, are pushed at the margin of the society, are stigmatized, and are discriminated. These consequences are the result of a repression policy that has not found the real targets. Targeting the bottom of the pyramid of crime is a way that is painful, without success, because the people can be replaced very easily, and it is ineffective in the destruction of the crime pyramid because it cannot target in an efficient way the summit of this pyramid.
Mr. Solana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much for this invitation. I think this, I mean, I have been working with the Commission from the very beginning, and I think that this report is very important because it tries to bring together those who are working on the drug policy community, and on the other hand, the impact that the policies that do take the states, which are enforcing part of the state role, that they have a separation gap that has to be filled. I think we cannot attack this problem without knowing or having a better knowledge of how the markets work and what is the influence of the person that Madame Dreifuss has expressed already. And to me, the essence of this report is to bring together the two communities, the community of drug users and the community of drug policy community, together with those who have the enforcement responsibilities. That is very difficult to do. It was very difficult to take this decision. It's not an easy report. It's a bold report, but always on the lines of the pragmatic approach that the Commission has. And I think that this is the beauty of this report, that calls to get to construct a conversation between the two sides, the side that is enforcing and the side which is committed to help the people with the drugs problems. And I think the recommendations are very clear. There are not very many, but for me, the most important thing to pass the message, the most important message is that we want to work pragmatically for a sound conversation between the enforcing part and the drug community. That is what I think is the most important message that I would like to deliver today on behalf of the Commission.
Thank you so much to you both, and I encourage everybody to take a look at the report. It was available on the Global Commission's website, globalcommissionondrugs.org. The report is called Enforcement of Drug Laws, Refocusing on Organized Crime Elites. Now, if I could turn to our other two colleagues on the panel, as specialists of international security, how do you briefly respond to what Monsieur Solana and Madame Dreifuss have just said? Does drug policy reform fit into your view of the global picture on international security policy? Monsieur Guéhenno, if I could ask you first.
I think drug policy fits very much in our view of conflict, because what we see in conflict countries is that drugs very often are a big source of funding for conflict actors. You look at an area like the Sahel, for instance. The conflicts in the Sahel, it's not only drugs, they're also human trafficking, they're also weapons trafficking, but drugs are a big part of the picture. And drugs in the Sahel would not be such a big part of the picture if there was not a big market up north in Europe. And so the connection between the markets where the repressive policy have supported organized crime in a way, and the producing countries is self-evident. You look at a country like Afghanistan. I mean, the drug business has been a big part of the war in Afghanistan. When Renata Dwan can speak in detail about that, since she worked there. So that's the first point. The second point is that what we see in those conflict countries is that we look at the wrong targets too in the terms of production. In many of those countries, you have poor farmers for whom drug is the only livelihood possible in the present context. And so when you spray the crops, when you destroy their livelihood, you just turn them into criminals. You push them into the ranks of criminal organizations. That's what happened. Instead of dealing with the big traffickers, who sometimes, to be frank, can be in the government itself, because that's my third point. What we see in conflict countries is that drugs criminalize the whole society. Because of the enormous money that is being made in drugs, because those enormous amounts, it's a competitive part of the economy, so to speak, and so it's everything that becomes corrupted, including the security services that can be bought in some cases, including the creation of private militias to fight that crime. And so you are in a vicious circle where the drug economy makes peace building, state building much more difficult, because all institutions are being corrupted by the drug business.
Thank you so much. Those are great points. Ms. Dwan, if I could turn to you for a second. From the work that you've been doing in UNIDIR, do you see an intersection here and a call to action, at least, to the disarmament community to address drug policy reform?
Thanks for the question, Tuesday. And I think it's always hard to follow such good and eloquent speakers and experienced as those before me. But I think you put your finger on something interesting in the issue and the linkage between drugs and arms, and particularly conventional arms. In a way, we can conceive of drugs as one good in a suite of goods. Illicit criminal enterprises may be involved in everything from cigarette trading to human trafficking to drugs and to arms. So to some extent, arms and drugs are coexisting and symbiotic. While we, I think, are still only now in arms control and disarmament efforts really beginning to put in-depth research into this area and delve into the evidence-based data that we need to better understand the linkages, I think we can already see some connections. The first is that we're often seeing human trafficking and illicit guns moving from developing countries to more wealthier societies, and the arms coming back from, together with cash, from those wealthier countries in return. So we see a cycle and direct connection. The second feature that we see is that criminal organizations acquire and make use of ammunitions and weapons to protect drug shipments and to enable drug shipments. And so you see, for example, in many of the societies in which violence is highest, Guatemala, Mexico, often clashes between armed groups involved in trafficking and in the movement of drugs. As armed groups are sophisticated, criminal groups are more sophisticated in their weapons, they draw and use armed groups with political or other ideologies, but they're often engaging local groups to protect drug deals and to protect transits and shipments. And one of the consequences of that is that arms and the arms that accompany that movement is often sinking down into communities. An example of that is Trinidad and Tobago, where it's not a significant destination drugs market, but it is a significant transit point in the drug market from South America to destination markets beyond. And so what you've seen in Trinidad is gun trafficking coalescing around the drug trafficking, and residues finding that into poor local communities, often urbanized communities, which is essentially what we describe sometimes as a weapon sink. And so in a way then that perpetuates that very arms that may have begun and developed around drugs becomes a driver for other forms of violence in those countries themselves. We also see that the scale of arms and weaponry by transnational groups and national groups can become so large that they become in and of themselves more powerful than some of the security forces that are attempting to enforce drug policies and tackle illegal trafficking. So you see situations in Mexico, for example, or engagement. What is the residual impact? The residual impact is one first of huge civilian capacities and suffering. You mentioned deaths. I think somebody mentioned deaths from drugs. About UNODC figures about 500,000 a year from drug overdose. A similar amount of people die violently every year, with the vast majority, 82% of that, mainly in towns and cities from organized crime. So you're seeing a scale and a pandemic of violence affected by organized crime, and with that use of small arms and firearms. If you take, for example, Guatemala, 200,000 deaths in 36 years of civil war. Since the peace accord signed in 1996, we've had 100,000 people killed, and in a situation in a country that is ostensibly at peace. So I think some very significant challenges to address. So what I think we're seeing, therefore, is that the weapons and drugs go hand in hand, both in terms of trafficking, both to enabling trafficking of drugs, and then as criminal syndicates outsource their activities, their transit and their weaponing, the development of further armed groups and capacities to wreak violence in societies. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks to you both. That was really interesting and a very broad set of issues. One thing I heard from both of you in your remarks, though, was the emphasis on the need to address demand reduction as well, and the fact that drug production, drug transits and the protection of drug routes is ultimately leading towards an end goal, which is to get the drugs to market. When we look from a drug policy perspective, there's a clear, I think, schism in the drug policy debate, where some countries are really shifting their drug control paradigms, beginning to look at legalization and regulation of their national drug markets, whereas others are becoming increasingly more focused on security responses and maintaining the stance that there is a possibility to eradicate the drug trade altogether. If I could turn back to Madame Dreifuss and Monsieur Solana for a second, it is suggested in some ways that legalizing drug markets could be a silver bullet that could take the money out of the organized crime and potentially reduce the violence. Do you think that that's a fair and effective characterization? Monsieur Solana, if you don't mind, to you first this time.
I think that is a very complicated situation. But I would like to say that those countries who have used the term war on drugs I think they are not producing successful responses. The war on drugs is not a correct way of fighting drugs, let's put it that way. And it produces consequences which are not wanted consequences, and changes dramatically the structure of the armed forces, of the police, the level of corruption that this war on, this definition of war on drugs may do. On the other side is the idea of legalization. It is true that we say in one of the recommendations that moving in that direction with prudence and in the pragmatic manner that we recommend should be something to be considered. And I think the equilibrium between these two things is what we have to do. Try to see how we can do better on the way of making easier the drugs to people, in the sense that they don't need the non-state actors which are ruling the world by the money that they take from drugs that they consume. And on the other hand, to avoid or to make a call to the countries also in which manner the repressive part of the equation is done. Because in some cases, really, they are producing more damage, more harm than good.
Madam Dreifuss.
Yes, I think regulation or legal regulation, putting the market from the production to the consumption in the responsible hands of states, is neither a silver bullet nor a mirage. It is a difficult way to go, because we are in front. On one side, we have to consider that the the national borders exist, and that the different countries are not always able to collaborate as they should collaborate. And this is one of the points we stretch in our report, is the importance of an international collaboration that is more effective, not built in different silos to fight against corruption, to fight against money laundering, to follow the profit and the benefit of criminal organization. But we know, and Dwan told it very well, that the criminal business is a very efficient business, a business who has no rules, because it is transnational, so it's not bound really to national security system. And it is a business that is very, very flexible and very modern, if I can say so, using all the best tools they can mobilize for their business. I mean, we are still thinking about mafias. We are still looking like the movies, Le Parrain and so on, and think that is the criminal organization now. It is not. It is now a very decentralized system, but in network, and using all kinds of products. It is really a system of business where, as it was told, you can go from one lucrative business to another in the same organization, or collaborate with other organizations. For instance, collaborate with a terrorist organization just to allow the flow of drugs going from one point A to a point B. So it is difficult, but we can really take them, many of their means, their field of profits, and this is possible in an international collaboration. On the other side, if we stay in the old story of fighting with, I mean, military means, as it is the case in Latin America, with a fight in the poor neighborhoods against the little workers, if I can say so, at the bottom of the pyramid, we will not succeed. And we will, in the country, produce a great harm to the people. So legalization has to be made on a cautious way, in an experimental steps where we know exactly what are the consequences on the different markets in the different criminal scenes. But it is, I am sure, the way to better protect life, human rights, and the possibility of an inclusive society, a society where you don't have real areas of the society which are no longer under state services, that are in the hand of criminal organization, because you have really to recognize that in many societies, the state is no longer the body that is bringing to the people what they need. Often it is the criminal organization that is jumping in this role, and this has to be corrected.
Thank you so much, Madam Dreifuss. I heard a lot in what you said in the emphasis on the transnationality of organized crime and criminal groups, facilitating drug trafficking, laundering the profits, diverting financing into different conflicts, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. And the real need there for international cooperation, multilateral approaches. Drawing on the fact that we do have an extraordinary amount of experience on this panel in the multilateral system, in multi-state organizations like NATO, I'd really like to throw the question open to the panel on how you feel or what you would reflect in regards to the tools and instruments that the multilateral system have at their disposal. Do you feel that the framework of international norms, conventions, drug control regimes, some of these responses are first of all fit for purpose to respond to the kinds of problems that we've all described in this conversation, and whether or not there's the political will and momentum and what it would take to bring them together to use them effectively to respond to transnational organized crime? Open the floor to whoever wants to go first.
I can take a go.
Thank you. Thank you, Renata.
No, I think, look, I'm not a drugs expert, so let me be very clear that I'm approaching it through the lens of perhaps weapons control or other international legal instruments or peace and security instruments. But what I would say is this, and I think you're hearing from all of us, that we're not saying that there's a one size fits all. There's a complex set of arrangements required to work together. But what we are saying, I certainly think, is that there's too much of a siloed approach. So I think we need to think about how are there ways that we can think about not just cooperation across states, but about the different instruments, the instruments tackling violence, the instruments tackling public health, the instruments tackling trafficking and trade. A second point I would say is that most of our multilateral conventions focus very much exclusively on the state, and they're intended to enable states to fashion their own tools and responses. But too often they're very broad and overarching, lacking in detail as to how states are going to implement, and lacking in the resources accompanying to support states. And I think Madam Dreifuss alluded to the fact that many of the states that are producers of sort of raw drug material are themselves the least capacitated to be able to put in place any of the mechanisms to implement conventions and agreements. So I think a bigger question, it seems to me, in multilateral convention making has got to be put on the implementation side, and what's the assistance and tools and resources and mechanisms to support those issues. And then I think a third and final point I would say is we're all circling at some level on the localization of drug and the networks and the complexity of the drug challenge, from the user to the supplier. And I think many of our conventions stop at the national central state level and have very little to say or do or of relevance for people either grappling with demands problems or supply problems at local and sub-regional level. So as we think forward, is there scope for more state exchange between what's working and what's not, and a more sustained conversation on local experiences on, for example, when I approach it from an arms control aspect, diagnostic of diversion points, diversion threats, and illicit trafficking routes, more exchange of intelligence exchange between institutions and states, more integration of risk analysis throughout the supply chain and communicating that across the board to a range of states so that there's a common picture of what we are needing to look out. I think we don't see as much as that. And then I would just conclude by saying, on the demand side, at-risk population segments, is there knowledge, communication, and transfer at the international level at trying to look at at-risk population segments and preventive action? I think so. It's a little bit about saying that the way we do conventions has to perhaps open up the box of the state, and that's often quite difficult from our international legal frameworks where the state remains a black box, so to speak.
Thank you so much, Renata. Can I ask anybody else if they'd like to comment? Happy
to follow on. I think the drug business has adapted much faster than we are, and that's the big issue. And the challenge is, as was said, to connect the very local to not just the international but the transnational, and that is not easy. I look at the institutions and I look at the norm. The institutions in peacekeeping, for instance, we have peacekeeping missions which are based in one country. You look at the situation in the Sahel. It's not a one country issue. No single country in the Sahel can deal with the issues that it's facing. It has to be a much more cooperative effort between a variety of countries. That is not the way, for the moment, the UN operates in terms of peacekeeping. So that's on the implementation side. On the norm side, I think it's Renata again who mentioned the connection, the close connection between drugs and guns. What's striking, I look at the situation like the United States and Latin America. The United States exports guns and it imports drugs. Now, there's a small arms convention and there's a powerful lobby that has prevented the United States from ratifying, from signing and ratifying that convention. That's a big issue. We spend a lot of money in trying to suppress drugs. We don't spend that much efforts on getting more visibility on weapons, where weapons go. And that would be an important part of the puzzle. So I think we need to adjust to all of that, because again, coming back to the question of livelihoods, if you just look at the repressive side of things, some countries are just going to sink. They need some support. So you can't just have repressive norms. You need to have a policy in place. If drugs is going to be less of a part, of a critical part in an economy, you need to have other parts of the economy that will be developed. So I do think we need a much more comprehensive conversation on what needs to be done.
We are in a globalized world where we have state actors, which are very important, but we have non-state actors, which are very important too. And we are looking at a problem which is created by non-state actors that have more power than the states. And therefore the difficulty is how from a state you can handle this problem. And therefore it's very difficult that state by state they can find a solution. So we have to see how the cooperation among states, as has been said by everybody, I think, the cooperation should be much wider, not only on the enforcement part, but also on the other side of the wall, and recognizing the difficulty of the problem, because the adversary we have is more powerful than many states, and therefore either we get together and we do write conventions or international documents which are really thinking about how to do it. I think we have a lot of thinking separately and of acting separately. And unless we are able to get the thinking and the acting in a more cooperative manner, we will never win this match. And that is very important, the role of the United Nations. I do think that unfortunately, in the years we are living, the multilateral organizations are not as, how would I say, as important as it used to be. Let's hope that in the near future, we will recover the sense of multilateralism, which is a basic for us, for those who want to fight against non-state actors which are more powerful than many states. And I hope that we will return to the multilateral approach, which is absolutely basic on the problem we are talking today about.
Madam Dreifuss, please.
Yes, in our report, we show clearly that on one side, the drug issue and the eradication of the drugs in the society have occupied the international community now for more than 100 years. And if you see how many conferences, how many convention has been negotiated during this 100 years, you will be amazed, because they are more numerous than other efforts to deal with the transnational crime. And if you see how many specialized entities working in silos have been created in the international community, you will be amazed. I mean, you have Organization for Arms, you have Organization for Drugs, you have Organization for Human Trafficking. And I would say the criminal organizations are laughing about that, because they are active often in all this field or collaborating with other organizations active in this field. And the real necessity is to bring all this together, but together not only in the view of repressing the crime, but seeing and analyzing the consequences of this policy on the society and the individuals. This is, I would say, the first recommendation we are doing in our report. Analyze the real consequences of repression. That doesn't mean that we don't need repression, but we need smart ones and not those that are now, I would say, mostly used. And what is more important, I would say, or as important, is explain to the public opinion why the repression fails. What are the consequences? Because it's very easy for a politician to show a hard hand, to a strong hand, to be strong on crime. And often this is in the populistic discourse what comes first, with the discrimination of the group that are considered as responsible for a bad situation in the country. But explaining that we need change is more difficult, and it's a great responsibility for political leaders to be able to say, yes, it's not enough to be strong in repression or harsh in repression. What is important is really to have this horizontal view to integrate the different elements. And Mr. Guéhenno spoke about development. I have to speak about health. If the repression means that the people have no access to the services they need, but they cannot access it because they are afraid about the punishment, in these cases, I would say repression has really a bad consequence, and we have to learn from this experience.
Thank you. So, I mean, finally, we're obviously living at the moment in extraordinary times. It's very hard to imagine an event without discussing even briefly the global pandemic and COVID-19. I think one of the things that have been very interesting in the COVID-19 space has been the way the criminal justice system has responded. Where prisons have become a point of mass contagion, we have seen prisoner releases in many countries in the world, and at a scale I think that's quite unprecedented, which has led some to ask, if we were able to release them now, why did we hold them in the first place? I mean, putting this all to you in a think forward kind of way, some have said that COVID-19 is an opportunity to rethink and reopen new discussions. If you were to take a final concluding thought on what opportunities do we have now in this question around reframing and looking to a new post-COVID-19 future, what is the one message that you would put forward?
My feeling on the impact of COVID-19, I mean, is mixed. Because on the one hand, I think what we're going to see is there are going to be less remittances for fragile countries. There's going to be pressure on aid budgets. So countries that are already fragile are going to become more fragile. And on the other hand, the drug traffickers, in some ways, are going, who already are more powerful often than states, are going to become even more powerful. And with the stress in the developed societies, you could even see, I don't know, an increase in drugs consumption, in demand for drugs. So that's on the very negative side. At the same time, as you said, there have been those releases from jail. I think there's going to be a debate on the role of repression. You see it, including on the discipline that is imposed on people for quarantine and all that. What's the most effective? Is it very harsh measures? Is it appeal to personal responsibility? So people are going to see that more and more, if they don't take personal responsibility, repression alone doesn't do it. And so that message, in some ways, could help move the needle on the attitude toward the drug policy. And that's my optimistic take on it.
I love the optimism.
Yeah. I really cannot add something to the statement of Mr. Guéhenno. I share absolutely the negative analysis, and we see, for instance, that at the beginning, everybody spoke about disrupting the criminal activities, because the possibility of bringing goods from one place to the other were limited. But we can see now that this was not the case. And that when I spoke before about the modernism of the criminal organization, it's true. I mean, they can use a post office and darknet and everything that is in the tools that are possible to continue the business. So yes, there is a pessimist way to see the COVID. It showed in many countries how unequal the societies are. I mean, the victims are not on the same side. On the other side, I agree that it showed, because it showed the problems, the visibility is always something good for change. And it showed this inequality. It showed that responsibility of the people is a greater possibility to deal with the problem than just punishment. And I think this is a lesson that we will have also to apply to the drug policy and the security policy as a common aim.
Indeed, vraiment un grand merci to all the colleagues on the panel. We have had a very engaged, I think very frank conversation that has really, I think, made clear the link between drug policy reform and global peace and security issues. And if anything, what I've heard from the panel today is that the link is not only evident, but becoming more so, and the need to respond is becoming more urgent. This conversation is, I think, an absolute exemplification of what we would like to see more of: a breaking down of silos, a sharing of approaches and perspectives, and looking for those interconnections.